There was somebody who had posted a video on YouTube, and it seemed like they were trying to get people to like help them figure out why it didn't look like, I think it was Roger Deakins that they were trying to follow. And people were saying, "Oh, you need to buy this stuff. You need to like buy a better camera and all this stuff." And I was like, "That's not the problem at all." And it's a constant issue that I find online, where one of the huge issues with, I think, just maybe it's the culture that we're in right now, but mainly it's how, I think mainly it's how like people have this fantasy in their head about what equipment does for you. And at the end of the day, it's usually like the skill that actually is needed. It's not buying a thing. Especially when empirically, like I was looking at what they had and I was going, you had the right camera. Whoever's saying that is being ridiculous. So I kind of want to talk about that and kind of go over that, because I think a lot of I think there's it's really freeing when you start looking beyond buying things. If all you think of is I need to buy a certain thing in order to do a thing, you're not really going to use what you have even at its highest potential, because you'll have that defeatist mentality immediately. So I want to go over that a bit. I stopped watching it in season 3, and I talked about Ozark last week and how weird I think it is. I think I talked about it last week in the stream. I really liked Ozark. It's kind of like, without spoiling anything, it feels kind of like Breaking Bad, except for a little bit different. I don't feel like the main character is. No, I won't. I won't say that because that's a little spoilery. But what I liked about Ozark, I really liked the way it looked. The casting is like absolutely perfect. It's one of the best cast shows that I can recall seeing in recent memory. It's wonderful. There's not a single actor choice that I felt was wrong, or the way that the characters were playing, or the actors were playing the characters that felt wrong. It just overall, it just felt like a really, really well told story. And some of those characters I didn't expect to like. And then season 3 happens, and there's this character they introduced that I could not stand, and the look is totally different, which is a really weird thing. Like, if you've already got 2 out of 3 seasons done, and then you change the look almost entirely for the 3rd season, it kind of feels really weird, and I'm not sure why they did that. And I talked about it last week, how they went from shooting, I think it was the Vericams, to shooting, what was it? The Sony, what was it? The Sony, what the hell was it? The large format Sony. And the Venice, they were shooting the Sony Venice. And I was like, I do not like the way that this looks. And I didn't know that they had changed anything until I looked it up. I was like, why do the proportions of the characters look weird? Why does this look less, in my feeling, why does this look less cinematic? And I wanted to know what it was that they did. I was like, did they change cinematographers? Like, what did they do? And it turned out that they had changed to a different format. And I hated it. I really don't like the way it looks at all. I like it when the characters are like they're a part of the scene. And it felt like the characters were completely removed from their environments, which really bothered me. And I guess that's what people are talking about with large format, is they're going, oh, large format, you get more depth of field control. And, this idea of getting shallower depth of field, I don't get it. Like that, I think that's part of what I was seeing, is just like, maybe they weren't stopping the lenses down enough for it to, have that same feel that I'm used to. But I didn't like it. And that was that was one of the main reasons for me. But also I felt like the writing wasn't as good. Like, the writing wasn't as good. It looked completely different, and I didn't like that. It was partly that it was different, and I didn't like that it was different. And it's also that I thought it looked weird. Like, it shouldn't be so different where you're like, why do things look weird now? So Yeah, it was the Sony Venice. I just my brain when I'm doing live stuff like this, my brain doesn't work right. So uh, yeah, I didn't like it. My wife also didn't like it. She, if my wife is complaining about it and she's not liking the story, like she was getting annoyed. Like she didn't like the way it was written and the way the characters were being written so much that she was just like, screw this. So we stopped watching it. It's really unfortunate. I had really high hopes for that show, and unfortunately I won't be watching any more of it. So kind of sucks. One of the things I found really funny this week is how people get really upset about nothing online, especially in discussion forums. Because, and that's why I kind of like posted that photo of me. That was actually from one of the video storyboarding that I'm doing for this project idea, and like I just look at some of these forums and they're like, what is wrong with people sometimes? Like, why do you get bent out of shape when you're just like this thread started with somebody talking about ProRes RAW and that it was being introduced in like the Zcams, and this was like this big thing, and I'm like, why is it such a big thing? I don't get it. So what? So they have this particular RAW format, and then it's like several pages long now with people getting upset and angry at each other, and I'm like, over formats, like why are you getting mad about that? And it was up to the point where like the Blackmagic design narc had to come in and be like, hey guys, keep it civil. And I'm going, I just don't get it. Like I don't get why people get so bent out of shape over something like that. It's very, very silly. um okay, so online discussions. So what I've noticed is that especially online, where it's more obvious because it's typed out and not just in a conversation back and forth. What happens is I think people are confusing their personal experiences and their biases with data, like empirical data about things. So what's happening is it's almost like on these discussion forums, people treat their personal feelings about something like a religion. Like you have to defend, your religion from people who are attacking your core beliefs of who you are. That I think sometimes if the discussion is about something like that, it kind of makes sense to me why you get a little upset about it. But if it's something like, what lens, if someone's asking on a forum like, okay, I've narrowed down my lens choices to these three lenses, which one is the sharpest out of these that I should get? And people get like angry talking about that. I don't understand that. So that's specifically what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about like, these philosophical discussions about things, because I can kind of understand why people get heated about that. But if it's like equipment related, or if it's, talking about something that's data driven or empirical, like I think we need to chill out about that kind of stuff. And I think it's a problem where, not only are we not really communicating very effectively because of our personal biases and confusing things like my personal beliefs with facts and data, because those can be competing things. But it's also that we need to evolve the way that we talk to each other. Like, especially online, people don't understand, like, I mean, if I'm an American, which I am, and I'm like typing out something in a sarcastic way, somebody across the, globe in another country may not really understand my humor at all. And someone will do that in response to somebody asking like a serious question, like trying to get help, like reaching out to a community of artists or community of just people who are like-minded, assumingly, and they get hit with like BS from people because they like, they'll have somebody who's being sarcastic with them when they don't really understand that, or they'll have somebody else that's just like giving them some other kind of bloviating response about something completely outside of the realm of what they're even talking about. And I find that really kind of annoying. um like, for example, let me just give you a for instance, because this literally happened. Okay. Somebody was asking about lenses. Okay, they were specifically asking like, here's these three sets of lenses, like these lens sets that I'm thinking of getting for shooting my narrative. They said, I want to have a lens that has, it's sharp enough to resolve like the 6K format that I'm going to be shooting, and I want it to be like a 4K final, right? So they specifically wanted the sharpest of these lenses, and they wanted to get people's comments, like, which of these did they find would work the best for their particular parameters. And there were people going in there saying, the lens doesn't matter. The screenplay, if you don't have a good screenplay, then the whole thing is garbage. Or people were literally saying that. I'm going, why are you talking about screenwriting in a forum about cinematography where somebody asked a specific question about lenses, and you're talking about something completely outside of that? If you're the cinematographer, chances are you're not writing it. That's ridiculous. Like, I couldn't believe that. And like, people were getting annoyed at that, and some other people were completely ignoring it. But I was just reading that going, I cannot believe that this is what someone's going to waste their time doing. Like, if you want to say that, like, maybe make your own thing, like in another space, and talk about that. That's totally fine, right? Like, that's totally fine. I don't have a problem with that. But if somebody's asking a very specific question, and you're making a completely different argument that's completely outside of what anybody's even talking about, I think that's one of the issues that we have. Like, okay, that's your opinion, but this is not the time and place to really have that. There's somebody who's really trying to ask a very specific question to get some help. If you don't agree with them, that's all fine, but I don't think that it's very constructive to then have some kind of discussion about screenplays when they're asking specific questions. And I think the other thing is that I have my personal biases, right? Like, my personal bias on lenses is I don't particularly like vintage glass really at all, because I feel like they're more trouble than they're worth. But I'm coming from it with my own experience and my understanding and what I do. Okay, I am a results-oriented person. Okay, if I am going, okay, if I'm saying this honking beast of a lens, which is the Sigma 50-100 f1.8, if I say this lens gives me adequate image quality without having to deal with lens flaring and like veiling glare and tinting and other issues that vintage glass has, that's my opinion. Like, that's my feeling, that's my conviction on using glass. Vintage glass, on the other hand, is a pain in the butt for me to use, because you have to do things to control more of the flaring and all kinds of other issues that you have with it, whereas this gives me a clean image out the box. And if I want to later, I can add whatever flares, I can add glare, I can add lower contrast, I can put a filter in front if I want, I can do all kinds of stuff. But that's my feeling on that, right? That doesn't mean if someone goes on the forum and tells me that this lens, they think it sucks because it's too clinical, that's not an attack on me. That's not an attack on me as a human being. They didn't call me ugly. They didn't call, my wife ugly. They didn't, do anything that would harm me emotionally. Not in my opinion, okay? So I guess that's the thing, is that if somebody has an opinion that's not yours, that's fine. People are allowed to disagree. If I say, which is a true thing, if I say that Fury Road is one of the best action films to come out in the last, 15 years, and somebody else tells me it's one of the worst, well, that doesn't mean that they're stupid. It doesn't mean that they're a moron. It doesn't mean that they're not really artistically inclined. It doesn't mean any of those things. All it means is that they have a different opinion. Okay? And I think that respecting those opinions and going like, okay, like, you have a different opinion, that's fine. You don't have to like my opinion, and understanding that they're not physically or emotionally attacking you will help people out in this kind of realm of having these online discussions. And it just seems to me that if we did that, we'd have a much easier time communicating with each other. Okay. If somebody is shooting, a project, and they're saying, I need to have this particular piece of gear, and I just tell them, you're wrong, you don't need that at all, how the hell do I know, right? Like, they might know something I don't know. That's another situation. There's all kinds of ways that we can try to do a better job of trying to understand what the other person is saying. Obviously, if this other person is going on there and intentionally provoking people and being a troll, that's a different thing. There are people who do that, and I think we need to ignore those people, or honestly, if it's a forum and they're trying to keep it civil, just remove them. But in situations where people are actually trying to have a conversation with each other, we can do a much better job of just listening with the intent to understand what the other person's saying, instead of just reading something and trying to argue with them, which tends to happen. I will read, not saying I do this, but there's people who will say, I will read this in an attempt to intentionally misunderstand what they're saying so I can sound like I'm right about something. Maybe don't do that, right? So I think that's enough of me kind of explaining what I mean. I think most of you understand what I'm talking about with this stuff. So here's what I think can be helpful, and maybe you can drop your suggestions down below on how this can be alleviated. But first of all, for being more helpful in online discussions, you can try to do these things. Number one, stick to the discussion at hand. If someone's talking about 3 lenses and you don't know the answer, and they're asking which of these lenses are sharper, right? And you don't know the answer, that's not like a free pass for you just to bloviate about something else entirely. If you don't know the answer, you don't have to leave anything. Just an example of how I see this. When you do that, it's like when you go on a Amazon or on B&H and somebody asks a question and then somebody answers and says, I don't know, or says their answer is completely irrelevant to the question. So anyway, the second thing, do your best to not get angry just because people are disagreeing with you. Disagreements are going to happen all the time. That's normal. That's life. And them disagreeing with you doesn't mean that they're calling you ugly. It doesn't mean that they hate your religion. It doesn't mean that you as a human being are no longer relevant. All it means is that they disagree with you, and that's totally fine. People disagree with me all the time, and I have to just go, yeah, that's your opinion. That's great. You have an opinion. I have an opinion. That's awesome. Whether or not you or I will respect those opinions, that's our choices. And, just because someone else disagrees with me doesn't mean I have to completely change my thoughts, right? So anyway, 3, which I think is really important, please understand that not everybody who's disagreeing with you is necessarily stupid or ill-informed. They may just have different opinions and experiences than you. So, for example, I have had horrible experiences with Apple products, and I will not be buying another Apple product for a long time because of my experience. Even if there's empirical data that tells me that an Apple computer is going to be better than a PC, I probably won't buy it anyway because I did not like that experience I had, and I'm not going to do it. So, and lastly, if you're going to engage online, please at least make an attempt to be civil with people. You can if you have a disagreement, there's a way to disagree and be respectful of those people. Okay. So that's what I have to say about that. Storyboarding. Yeah. So I wanted to talk about this because I realized that maybe a lot of people don't think about this. So when I was in film school a long time ago, longer than I care to remember because it was a long time ago. I was actually in, I think, yeah, I think it was in one of my editing classes. Um, the professor wasn't particularly great, but in this editing class, he showed a video, and it was about behind the scenes. And if I remember correctly, I hope I'm remembering correctly because this is in my brain. It was for one of Robert Rodriguez's films. It was either Desperado or it was Once Upon a Time in Mexico. I don't remember which one. It was one of those. And they were showing this technique that he was using where he was doing video storyboarding. That's what we determined as a class that that's what it was. And what he did was he took like a handy cam, like a regular little video camera, and he would go to the set, and it would be without lights and all that stuff. Okay, so it's just like him and some stand-ins. Sometimes it would be crew, like he would have like a, I don't know, a gaffer or like grip people or whoever, and they'd be playing the roles. And he would have like the handy cam, and he would shoot the different shots and the scene just without the lights and without the actors and everything. So you got to think about it like do a super 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 low budget little short film, and the lighting's going to look crappy and whatever. But that's not the point. The point of it was to basically get the shots how they would appear, and then he would have them cut in sequence. And what you can do is you can actually, for your preparation for the shoot, you can play this back. And especially today versus back then, it's a lot easier because now you can get like a little tablet and you could like play the movie that you've made and see exactly how the shot's supposed to look, and you know how it's going to cut. Whereas in the regular storyboarding process, where you're going to get like still images and it'll have information, and probably it'll depending on how you want it storyboarded, because there's like the Hollywood way of doing it. There's like 100 different ways to do storyboards, but depending on how you do it, usually you're at least going to have an image and accompanying dialogue, or at least a page or something like that to tell you what it's supposed to be. So you'll get that on set and you'll use that, to frame your shots. But for me, because I don't draw very well, and especially if I'm doing a very, very low budget thing where I don't have a lot of people, I like to do it this way with video storyboarding because I can get kind of the look of it. And not only that, but if you're doing super low budget stuff, you can get an idea of how the house lights look, So, for example, let me just show this, because it just dawned on me that probably a lot of you guys don't really do this kind of way of doing it, and I do, because I think it's just easier. Let me get the image real quick so you guys can see it. The image that I just put in the chat, that's from me doing my video storyboarding, and I was basically like, I used the camera and I was putting myself in position and getting the shots like I wanted, and I cut the whole sequence out so I could show the guy that I'm going to be collaborating with on this project, because he's going to do like the visual effects and some other things for it, how the sequence was going to play out. And you can do a whole set of shots and do basically shoot the whole thing, at least the major shots you want to do. Maybe you leave out some of the cutaways, or you leave out some of those smaller shots, maybe establishing shots that you might get from Getty or wherever, if you don't actually have a building that looks like what you want it to appear in for your set. But you can at least get the bulk of what you're going to be shooting that day down. And then when you go and shoot it, you've already basically had like a dress rehearsal of the shoot, and you can get all of your major shots. So for me, like that headshot was one of the shots I wanted to make sure was in there. It's like the guy's seeing something really weird happen, and all he does is like drink his coffee. So yeah. I mean, I could maybe do a video about that, but I'm hoping that by explaining it to you, it kind of makes sense what I'm talking about, because it's just a different way of thinking about it. Like the storyboard process being just, illustrations. If you suck at that and you want to, you know, especially get in there, see what the house lights would look like without anything, so you can maybe bring in some extra lights for like those specific shots where you just don't have what you need. You can get a look at that as well. So yeah, that's the essentially what a video storyboard would be like. Here's a little update on how the live stream will be put on YouTube for now. For people who can't make it to the live stream, or if you have to duck out earlier, if you didn't make it to like the beginning section, what I'm going to do is take my live streams and cut them into segments, so that you're not going to get the whole thing, because a lot of it will be, sometimes it's like just waiting for people, or you know, me not really, because it's live, I have to use my brain to try to figure out how I'm going to say something. But you're at least going to get like the major segments and the biggest takeaways from those live streams, so you at least have something. I just, at this point, like, I don't really want to put the whole thing up for various reasons, so I may do that later, but there's no promises on that. And I'm going to try to get them up within a week or two from the time that the live streams take place. So please don't hate me if I don't get them up in time. There's reasons why I might not be able to, because I do work, like everything I do for this channel has been free. So there may be something else I need to do in the meantime for that, but you know, this isn't my job. So please, you know, forgive me if I don't get things up in the timeliest of manner. Hey Tony, film fell apart due to pandemic lockdown, but next year is going to be epic. Question, what is your opinion on aspect ratios in films like in The Dark Knight? I think it depends on the story that you're telling and how you just particularly like it to be. There's a standard, which is the you know, standard flat. You know, 16, there's nothing wrong with like 16:9. There's nothing wrong with having the standard 1:8:5. There's, you know, it just depends, I think, on the scope of the project especially, and what you're trying to do. I think there's a weird thing with some projects where if it's like a television show, people get annoyed if the full screen isn't being utilized. So it's kind of like a weird situation. Like, I don't know if you guys remember back in the day when they used to do pan and scan for taking, like, you know, a regular film that would be in widescreen, and then they would, you know, crop it to where it would fit, you know, that CRT rectangle that was at a completely different aspect ratio, which was 4:3. So I think that wider screen is definitely more epic. Like, the wider it gets, I think the more epic it tends to look. And sometimes that works really well, and I think other times it doesn't. If you're doing a television comedy and you're doing it in like CinemaScope, I think that would be a weird choice. But if you're doing a, you know, epic film that is going to be shown in IMAX, and the thing you're selling is how, you know, big these big you know, exterior shots of like mountains and all this kind of stuff, wider screen I think would be more appropriate. So I just think it depends on what you're going for. That's what I think about that. What happens if I don't convert to Rec 709 and just color correct my Blackmagic RAW? That's from Gabriel. So if you want to do color correction and you want to do the grading and all that stuff manually, what you're basically saying is, like, is it okay, from my understanding, is it okay to manually grade your footage? I don't care. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If you know how to do it properly, then I don't think there's a real problem with it. And if that's for like your own personal projects, especially, I see nothing wrong with it. Now, where I do see some issues is if you're trying to color grade something and you're going to try and take that grade and apply it to different presentations. So for example, not everything is Rec 709, right? So if you wanted to, let's say you had a video that you made, okay? Let's say the video is just a nature video. You go out in your backyard, you shoot some plants, shoot some grass, or you go to the park, you shoot some grass, you shoot some bugs, you shoot some birds, or whatever it is, okay? And you manually grade everything to be Rec 709 compliant, okay? If you ever wanted to put that into Rec 2020, HDR, or whatever, you're gonna have to regrade like the whole thing, because the way that you're grading it for the presentation manually is going to be just like for one output. So you're going to have to go back in and grade it manually for HDR or DCI-P3 or whatever. But if you use color management, on the other hand, when you're setting your output settings, it doesn't matter if it's ACES or if it's in the Resolve color management, you're going to have a much easier time, because when you set your outputs to Rec 709 Gamma 2.4, right? Let's say you're doing that for your project. Whatever you're doing in between is going to be for, that output. When you change the output to DCI-P3 or whatever, it will convert for that. You might have to do some tweaking, but you're not going to have to do everything over from scratch, okay? So that's really my answer. There's nothing wrong with doing it manually, as long as you're not expecting to take that and then put it into some other presentation format. But if you're presenting Rec 709 and that's all you're going to use it for, totally fine. And most stuff is going to be Rec 709 anyway. But that's why I like using. And the other thing, I'll just say the other thing is, if you don't really know how to properly present something in Rec 709, you don't know what to look at to make sure that the colors are going to be represented correctly. You're having trouble with making sure that it's the contrast and the gamma and everything is all conforming properly to whatever presentation color space you're going for. You're going to have a harder time with it. In my opinion, because you just don't know all the ins and outs, or how to even know if you're messing something up. And that's one of the things I find really interesting about seeing when people start doing color grading, and they usually just do it on, like, they'll just start doing it manually, especially if it's log. They'll just start manually trying to correct it, like they did with their Rec 709 stuff that they would get usually from like a DSLR, where it'd already be pretty much in the color space. You just do some tweaking in the contrast and you're pretty much done. You end up where they, their colors can look really strange, or the contrast can be really nutty. Like it'll have way too much contrast, or won't have enough, or these other issues. And I think that especially if you're starting out, having some kind of help, at least get the gamma and the color space that you're trying to get into kind of mathematically done for you, and you do the grading in between the input and the output, that can be a big help as far as the speed, and also just to get a look that you like. As long as your settings are correct in your inputs and outputs, usually my experience is it's a lot easier and faster and effective to get the kind of look you're going for. But I don't think there's anything wrong with doing color, doing your BRA manually. I just think that Gabriel says, when I convert to Rec 709 when using blue lights, everything gets really ugly. So I'm assuming you mean like when you do a regular conversion. The reason that's happening is because you need to map the values in between. When that's happening, it usually means that the color gamut that you're using is way bigger than the output, and you need to make sure it's being converted correctly. If you just do it straight, from this to Rec 709, remember, like your color spaces, if you're going from Blackmagic 4 color, what do they call it? Oh my God, Generation 4 color science, the blues and the reds and cyans can be pretty saturated, and the yellows end up being more saturated than I like either. So, you're gonna want to correct that, but that's all part of the color correction process. You can, of course, do that manually on your own, but you can do that with a Rec 709 conversion very easily as well. You can just use a gamut mapping tool, and there's a number of different ways you can do it. I have a video that I recorded like several times when my mic was messing up and I have to redo it. That goes over a couple ways that you can do that with a regular Rec 709 conversion. So that video will probably help you out in that. Basically, you just need to put a gamut mapping tool in your pipe and you're good to go. It's relatively simple to do to correct what you're talking about. And I think you can get better results generally by just, using the tools that are available to you in there. Ankar says, people got angry at me for including some log in my color reel. Not a pro colorist, but I included log for people who also want to learn the process of grading. Most just want end results, I guess. Yes. Well, the thing is, like, if you make something in your reel or whatever, dude, you can make it whatever you want. You don't have to conform to what other people are telling you have to do. There's no reason why you'd have to do that. If you're making a reel to get, you're making a reel that's showing how you can color correct any problems that somebody might have on a shoot, including the actual log footage and showing what you did makes sense. It makes sense. You go, look, this guy recorded in the completely wrong white balance and I was able to correct it. Look at this. And you do like a wipe and you show how you corrected it, and then you do a wipe with maybe 2 or 3 different looks that you can provide. I see nothing wrong with that. I'm not sure the context of what you have for showing log, but there's nothing wrong with including that. If you want to, you can do whatever you want with your projects. Deacons, I want the sharpest, the cleanest. I want the lens that shows the world or records the world the way I see it. I agree with Deacons on that point. That's why I use, for the value, these Sigma zooms, the f1.8 zooms. They're, for the money, they do what Deacons is talking about. And no one pays me to say that. That's my honest opinion on it. After using Canon, Carl Zeiss to an extent, a number of other kinds of lenses. Carl Zeiss, obviously, you pay more, you can get like really good renderings. Problem is, shooting wide open with the cheaper Zeisses is not great. Shooting wide open with any of these zooms will give you generally better sharpness and chromatic aberration control than the Carl Zeiss lenses that are the cheaper ones, including the Contax ones. For me, like those Contax ones and the the ZE, ZF, the older Carl Zeiss ones you can get for Canon EF or Nikon F mount, those need to be stopped down a bit usually. Some lenses like the 50 f2 macro is fine, but like the 50 1.4 and the 85 1.4, at 1.4 they are not great lenses. But when you stop them down to like 2.8 f4, great. I love Sigma R lenses. I think those are great. Very sharp, very clean. Yeah, Benjamin, they're great. I think they're great lenses for the price. You can get, like, my opinion, that 50 to 100 f1.8 is as sharp as a majority of primes I've ever used at every focal length, wide open, and including stopping down. It's a great lens. I mean, especially like I use it on the Fuji X-H1 with the sensor movement to stabilize that. Dude, it's awesome. And it's incredibly sharp and clean. And then when you take it in post, you can do whatever the hell you want with it. You want to add a lens flare, you want to add veiling glare, you want to add chromatic aberration, you can always do that in post. It's harder to clean up that stuff in post than to have it like corrected when you get it. So, dude, Ankar, this looks great. What are people are complaining? Let's see some more of this. This is looking pretty good. Oh, and you got that, like, the shirt changing colors. Yeah, man, this looks pretty good. Yeah, I'll tell you this, you definitely picked the right image to start with, because going and getting that the aquarium, I'm not sure, maybe this was like actual underwater stuff, maybe it's not an aquarium, but yeah, getting that right off the top and all that color pop out and using the log to show what you actually did is definitely a good idea. And showing the different looks you can do is also a really great idea. My only complaint would be that on some of it, you don't leave it on the look long enough to see what it is that you're doing. Kind of, we get like a fraction of a second to really see it. And I think if you leave it a little bit longer on your money shots, I think that would be really, that would be better. For example, around 40, what is this, 48? Let's see here, 47, yeah, 47 to 48. You're showing how you were able to remove some of the lines in her face. To really show that, you need to hold on it a little longer so that we can really, really see it. Same thing goes for, hold on, for around 51 to 53, the lady with the headphones. I only, like the first time through, I didn't see it, that you cleaned up her face. So let me go back and make sure yeah. So your final look is really good and we don't get to see it. So hold longer on your money stuff, especially like these ladies, and you're able to clean up like their faces. People are going to want that. So check that out, Ankar. That would be my advice for you. You have really good stuff in there. Just hold on it longer so that we can see your money stuff. And let's see, it's 124. That's a good length. You could probably push it out to 2 minutes, and just give us more of a hold on your final that you're trying to show. Even your sports stuff, I don't know if the shots are, like, I'm not sure if this is all like free footage that you downloaded somewhere to get this stuff, and it's only like a certain length. But if you can, just kind of lengthen all that stuff out, because if I'm a prospective client, I want to actually see what the results were. I don't want to have to keep scrubbing back and play it over and over again. So just do a little of that, and I think you got a really good reel there. I really like the colors that you got here in the fish, but I'm a sucker for that stuff. Like, a lot of people like the low contrast, low saturation stuff. I like the aquarium stuff. Looks awesome to me. And I think you nailed the Mad Max teal and orange pretty well. Good shot. I don't know where you got the footage. If you shot this, good work. I think some of this is sample footage though. Oh yeah, one more thing. I would also get rid of this burn effect at 24. Just pick something else. I gotta be honest, I don't like those kinds of transitions. That's my personal bias though. So if you like it, leave it. But those kinds of transitions, I don't like them. Simple wipe or a cut is fine, but for like this, just wipe it off. That's my opinion. You don't have to listen to anything I say though. Blackmagic Raw and ProRes Raw. So the reason why I want to talk about this is because there was this like ridiculous argument going on in the Blackmagic forum, because someone was like, you know, I'm not really sure what they were trying to say. Something about like how Blackmagic Design needed to support ProRes Raw, or that they were behind or something because ProRes Raw was now being put into Zcam. And I was like, man, I saw like, was it Peter, what the hell is his name? Peter something. You guys will probably know it. Big YouTuber, Peter, oh geez, I don't remember his name right now. I'm bad with names, by the way. My brain doesn't work right with names. But this guy, I guess he got like early access to one of the Zcams with ProRes Raw. I'm going to tell you right now, I saw nothing in that footage that made me think that was shot in RAW at all. And it looked very yellow. I'm not sure why it looked the way it did, but there was nothing. The footage did not look wonderful to me. I saw nothing in that from the Zcam that made me go, Hmm. Yeah, these other companies that are even providing ProRes 444, like the 12-bit 444, I mean, they got a real problem. No, nothing from that made me think that at all. And they were trying to use that as like some kind of showing that it was great. I didn't get it. Um, so here's what I know about this whole thing with Blackmagic Raw and ProRes Raw in particular. You've got uh, and I guess we can throw Red Code in there too, because this is partially Red Code's Red. I think Red is to blame for some of this, because you've got, and it's, I think it's just how technology works, where somebody will come up with an idea that everybody else was already thinking. Just someone crossed the finish line first for whatever reason, and then wants to put a patent on that thing, right? So that's what happened with the Red Code stuff. With Red, they have this patent that's this like ridiculous, overreaching, in my opinion, overreaching patent that tries to make it where other people are not allowed to compress raw files, as if nobody would have ever figured that out, or found the need for it or whatever. And usually, the way that it works in technology is like these companies just kind of like feast on each other for these kinds of problems. A company is having an issue when they have to use these patents like this to try to prevent other companies from making decent products. Okay, so what happened with Red is they were saying, Blackmagic Design, you're not allowed to use that Cinema DNG compression anymore because we said so. That's what I understand about it. Okay, and I don't think it was ever publicly like that. But what I understand about it from the sources that I've seen about it is that Blackmagic Raw and removing Cinema DNG was a way to try to prevent any kinds of issues sprouting up from Red. Okay, that's fine. So you have Blackmagic Raw. That's it's relatively proprietary, meaning that the way that they encode it is kind of secretive and only they're allowed to do it. But for decoding it, they're allowing anybody to decode it on whatever platform. So that means if you're a company, if you're Adobe and you own Premiere, right? Or if you're Sony and you own Vegas, and you're making it where Blackmagic Raw can't be decoded by your program, it means you're actively, making a decision not to support that codec for whatever the reason is. Now, I can understand less professional. I could understand it if there was less professional editing systems that didn't support something like Blackmagic Raw. But if you're Apple and you own Final Cut, the fact that Apple will not support Blackmagic Raw is a decision that they've made to intentionally not support it, to hurt the sales of Blackmagic Design products, and to specifically with BRAW, because BRAW is a good codec. There's people who like it or don't like it, whatever. It's a good codec. The amount of compression rates that you have the two different queues, and you have the 3.1, 5.1, 8.1, 12.1. I mean, that what I say, however many different compression rates that you can use, which on their Blackmagic cameras go, 5.7K, 6K, 4K. I mean, they're wonderful. They really are. They provide good quality results, and they operate very much like RAW. There's just a few things that are different, right? The way that they do the encoding is a partial demosaic, and then the rest of it's done afterward, most likely to deal with the patent that Red has. Okay, so it's kind of like a necessity that they had to build in order to get a RAW type of codec to regular people. Like me, I wouldn't be shooting RAW if I didn't have this, because there's no reason for me to really need to shoot RAW. But the fact that I can, with a cheap setup, and have a huge compression rate for storage is awesome. So I use it because it makes shooting way, way easier. I'm not going to pay $15,000 to $20,000 for a camera to shoot RAW. Ain't going to happen. I mean, I was happy enough when this thing, the Blackmagic Pocket 4K, had 10-bit ProRes. Just getting that in like the Canon C100 was impossible. They wouldn't give you a 10-bit internal. They wouldn't give it to you. So the fact that I could get that with a $1,300 camera is awesome, right? So anyway, and you also have this ProRes RAW thing going. ProRes RAW should be similar to Blackmagic Raw. I don't know if it's better. I don't know if it's worse. You know why I don't know? Because Blackmagic Design won't support ProRes RAW, and most likely, if this is from how Apple has protected their proprietary stuff for a long time, is probably something to do with them. My understanding. I mean, one of the big competitors that they'd have in this raw market would be, you'd have Red, and then you'd have Blackmagic Design, and you got Apple with their own, ProRes RAW thing. The fact that on Windows machines you haven't been able to render in ProRes really frustrates the hell out of me. The fact that they won't even let you render that really speaks a lot to how this industry works with patents and how silly they can be. I mean, do they really think that, somebody who's very ardent in not buying Apple is going to buy an Apple product just so that they can render ProRes? I'm not doing that. I'm not going to do that. So, basically, this is all a bunch of stupid BS with how patents work with the technology community, and they're just going to have to do this fight, and then hopefully we'll have just a bunch of formats that everybody supports. I mean, that'll probably be what ends up happening, because they'll most likely lose it. I don't want it to be, going back to Red, where we saw that when Red had control, they were doing a job of preventing anybody from making it really accessible to people who wanted to pay less. And there was no reason for that other than they wanted to control the price. And they wanted to set how expensive it was going to be to use their technology, because there was a lot of people who worked on it. And there was a lot of work done before they even came around thinking of making Red code that helped develop their compression algorithm. Okay? So that's why I think this whole thing is silly. I mean, let's just think about it like this, right? Would Red have ever been able to make a camera if people hadn't already made digital cameras to begin with? They just built on other people's technology. Would Red code have ever existed had compression algorithms hadn't already existed before? Probably not. They didn't create the first compression algorithms, but for some reason they're going to control how everybody's going to do raw. It's ridiculous. So, this is all a result of this total bullshit of how it works. And I saw it happening firsthand when I was working in visual effects. If you ever dug into the court cases about how people deal with post-production stereoscopic 3D to make like the 3D movies where you use stereoscopic glasses, everybody sues each other. And it's a big waste of time and money because there's really only one way to do it. And everybody thinks that they came up with the best way and that theirs is the only way and everybody else is stealing from them. It's just a way for people to try to starve out the competition to make it where another company can have a monopoly over it. That's really the idea. That's what they're trying to do. And I don't like it. I think it's a dirty part of the business. And it's very frustrating to navigate if you just kind of want to use this stuff. Because again, like the deal with RAW, just having codecs that work like RAW, having codecs that work kind of like RAW is, the fact that it was years and years and years that people couldn't get it because someone just decided it was going to be expensive, that tells you what'll happen if, just one company wins this RAW battle, and I won't be using ProRes RAW because I use DaVinci Resolve for color grading. And if I can't, if Blackmagic Design is not going to support ProRes RAW, then I'm just not going to shoot it. End of story. So I think that for most of us, it'll kind of come down to the NLE that you pick. I mean, if you use Resolve like I have, because it's the most cost-effective solution for grading and doing editing, because it has, you buy it once, you get all the free updates, right? It's not a subscription like Adobe is, right? And I can do my editing in it and I can do my grading in it. If they're not going to support ProRes RAW, then I'm not going to shoot it. It's that simple. I'll shoot Blackmagic RAW. So, and I don't really, to be honest, I don't really see enough of a difference between Final Cut and Premiere. I don't see enough of a difference for me to go and get an Apple computer and get Final Cut instead of using Premiere if that's what I wanted to do. And also, the other thing with ProRes RAW is there's only, from my understanding, 2 compression rates, and even in softwares that are supposed to support it, you don't get the same kind of ease of correcting white balance that you do with Blackmagic Raw. With Blackmagic Raw, for example, and of course, I have to use what I've seen other people do with it in order to see what it can work, because I haven't used it. But with Blackmagic Raw, it keeps like the actual number for the white balance that you set it to. If you set it to 3200 Kelvin, it'll stay there. If you set it to, the next shot to 5600 Kelvin, it'll stay there. And then let's say the actual white balance is 4400 Kelvin for an entire scene. You just need to punch in 4400 Kelvin. It'll all be fixed. Whereas from what I saw with ProRes RAW, it starts at an arbitrary number and you have to pull the slider. Kind of like how when you don't shoot RAW, you shoot like a 10-bit file, and you do the white balance correction in Premiere with the slider, it'll have the white balance be like a negative value or a positive value from 0. Not as easy to do white balance correction as just punching in a number, right? So, I mean, that's my feelings on that. It's just an annoying situation. And to me, like, I would rather people be annoyed at the companies rather than be annoyed at each other on a forum. Because, anyway, stopping Blackmagic from compressing DNG is ridiculous. You can take a .dng and apply compression like bzip2 and get a losslessly compressed file that's about 25 to 30% of the original size. Yeah, you can do that. I mean, imagine if you got sued because you did that. I mean, imagine if you created like your own external recorder and you used known compression techniques to program, like, just use your imagination, okay? Imagine you made your own like external recorder, right, with the screen and everything in your own home. And you started your own little company and all you used was known compression software that's always been around and just was giving people losslessly compressed DNGs, and you could get sued because somehow somebody had a patent over that thing you'd already been doing, like that everybody already does, that they didn't create, because that language in their patent is so freaking broad that they'll do it. And what's really frustrating is that regardless of whether or not they have a case, they'll do it anyway, because even if they lose, if you fight it, they can make you spend so much money that it'll make you go bankrupt. So it's a win-win for them. That's what's so frustrating about those patent suits. Yeah, Red and Atomos, they always try to put BMD out of the road. Yeah, I think, Benjamin, that part of it is that Blackmagic Design kind of does that to themselves a little bit because they are poking the bear. I mean, when you had several of the Blackmagic cameras come out, like, they had their quality assurance issues and all that. I mean, it's part of growing pains when you have a new company and you're doing something that's, in technology and manufacturing. It's basically all the parts of making a product. The fact that they could give you high-end results with spending a fraction of the money is really, it's really something. And it did upset the apple cart. And anytime you're a company doing that, someone's going to try to buy you out. And if they can't buy you out, they're going to try to ruin you in any way that they can, because they want to set their own prices. I think that there's several companies that have been kind of skating by with a lot of business practices that, they're like, we're number one company in sales, so we don't really have to do a whole lot to please our people. We just need to have a new product every few years. That's the same thing they got last time with only a few extra features. Well, then Sony upset the apple cart when they started bringing out their mirrorless full frame cameras, and especially with like the A7 III making that only like $2,000 on release was a huge upset to, Canon and Nikon for stills. And then with Blackmagic Design, you got to think of the same thing with, these, if Red's making $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 cameras. I saw one 8K camera for like $50,000, and I'm going, why? Why would you, like, I'm just trying to rack my brain on like, why, if Yellowstone is shot, a movie like, or a show like Yellowstone is shot on like the RE Mini, what's an 8K camera going to do? How is that going to be that much better? So anyway, It just, I mean, that's just business, you know. It's annoying because as a consumer, you're stuck in the middle. Blackmagic is on another level. I mean, they have free courses for DaVinci Resolve, and we can even get certification. Love My Pocket 4K. Yeah. I don't know about like certification and the free courses. I mean, there's a ton of free information and stuff like that on DaVinci Resolve, and I think it's because it's so accessible now. But yeah, I mean, I think that the company has like their own kind of message and their own kind of way that they want to do things. Obviously, they need to make money, right? It's not a charity, and they can't do everything. And they're hitting a specific market that had been underserved for a very, very long time. And it's just, you know, this is a reaction that these higher end, use that in quotes, companies are having to it. You know, they go, oh, our sales are hurt. There must be something wrong with what they're doing, instead of looking at their own way of doing business and reevaluating. To Canon's defense, I think that they've, over the last maybe year or so, have done a lot to kind of fix what I think was an issue with them, especially with that C300 Mark III. It looks like a really great, you know, camera and is giving people what they want. But there's some other companies that are just not listening. I think Red's one of them. I don't think Red's listening at all. ProRes RAW does not currently allow to change white balance in ISO in post. That's what I heard, but I didn't want to say that in here because I haven't used it yet, so I'm not 100% sure, but that's what I'm seeing. I mean, sometimes I think the ISO adjustments are not that big of a deal because like if it's something like the Blackmagic Pocket 4K, you can do the exact same thing with ISO. The only difference in changing ISO for the Blackmagic Pocket 4K, for example, is just the curve changes, which you could do manually. It just kind of makes it a little bit more convenient that you can change it in post. I think some other cameras also bake in that ISO, so I think it might be camera dependent, because if the ISO of that camera is not invariant, meaning that when the only thing ISO is doing for a range is, you know, adding gain in post, if it's actually like when the RAW's captured, it's using analog gain on the circuits of the sensor, and it's then giving you the raw signal from that, then I'd say changing the ISO in post doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, because that doesn't really do anything. All it's, you know, like even if you could, it wouldn't actually be changing the ISO like in the camera, because there's actually analog gain being applied, right? So if you own the Blackmagic Pocket 4K, just think of it like this, right? Imagine that the camera you're using is like when you go from ISO 1000 to 1250. But every time you change the ISO, there's like analog gain that's actually kicking in every time. If that's the case, then, you know, recording that raw and then changing ISO doesn't make any sense. So I don't know. I don't know if that's the case, but the white balance is a troubling thing. To me, since Blackmagic RAW works like how RAW works, where you can, you know, set the white balance like you're supposed to and adjust the white balance in a way that, you know, clearly does not show clipped values. It doesn't show that it's bending values. It just looks like you shot it there at whatever that white balance you've changed it to. The fact you can do that, and then you compare that to, like, you know, the 10-bit ProRes and how different that is, that's the way that RAW is supposed to work. If ProRes RAW doesn't allow you to do that, then I think you got a problem there. Then it doesn't really even function like RAW. It kind of would just function like ProRes, but it's just like a 12-bit. It would just be like a 12-bit 444 file. So I don't see what the difference is other than a compression rate. Here is a situation, and if you see my community page, then you're probably aware of one of the issues that I have, or that I had this past week, and that was with a video that was put up, and somebody was trying to get a specific look, right? Like they were trying to shoot and get a look, and they weren't successful, which is fine. You don't have to be successful at everything you do, and there's always room for improvement, right? So like the annoying thing, like I always read comment sections because I want to see how people are reacting to things. It's part of what I do as somebody who's creating this kind of content, is I think it's part of my job to see how other people are doing it, what kind of content are they making, how do people respond. And what I was noticing was how off base some people were in explaining why he wasn't able to achieve the look he was going for. And I was seeing people say, well, you know, these higher end cinematographers, they're using, you know, RE Alexa cameras with like all this dynamic range. So that's why it doesn't look the way that you expected. And I'm like, I'm looking at the shots and I'm going, there's nothing clipped in here. What are you talking about? If there's nothing clipped in the shot, meaning like your shadows don't look noisy, the highlights don't look like they're blown, or at least blown in a way that would be distracting, then that analysis is completely wrong. Okay, like if you're shooting a scene and the scene has only about 10 stops of dynamic range in it, shooting a 12 stop camera, 14, 16, 18 shouldn't make much of a difference for a Rec 709 final, which is going to be squeezed down to like 6 stops anyway. Okay, like if the scene doesn't have 20 stops of dynamic range in it, then you don't need a 20 stop dynamic range camera in order to capture all the data. Okay, so you have a breakdown in their understanding of equipment, in my opinion. You know, you don't, if you're shooting in a situation where there's, you can get all of the necessary data in the scene by using whatever you've got, the problem isn't the camera. Okay, if you got all the data you needed with the camera, all of the data, and you're complaining about highlight roll-off, it's because you're not manipulating the luminance data in a way to give you a good highlight roll-off, because all the data is there. Okay, if you are shooting with like the Pocket 4K and you're shooting in RAW and you're complaining about the color science of the camera and that's why you couldn't get the colors you wanted, it's on you. The color science of the camera at that point is completely irrelevant. It is. It's irrelevant because the data is there. All you need to do is get your shot the way you want, and you need to get your skills up. And that could be in post-production, or it could be actually on the shoot of the day. Okay? So if, for example, there's a trick that a certain cinematographer uses in a lighting device, which quite often with people who make a very unique look, it's probably some very special thing they're doing with lighting and a mod that they're using on their lights, or specific types of lights with the mod to get like a particular way that the light shapes a face. If you're not doing that exact same thing, your results won't be the same, because you're starting out with the assumption that they're just using like a regular aperture 120 or whatever light. And that's not the case. They're going to be using something entirely different. They could be using a whole completely different lighting setup than what you're thinking. And if you don't know what that lighting setup is and how they're shooting it, and especially the lighting ratios, which I've talked about this before, but if you don't know what lighting ratios are, and you're not looking at a shot and trying to match that shot like as a practice to get that shot to look the way you want, and you're not even thinking about lighting ratios, then that's a problem with how you're shooting. It has nothing to do with the camera. Absolutely nothing to do with the camera, okay? Has nothing to do with it. So that was what I was noticing. I was like, it's like somebody saying, dude, you've got a heart condition, and everybody else, like this guy was saying, you need to go get, you need to go get a cast put on your arm. If you got a heart condition, the cast does nothing, right? Same thing in this situation. Their analysis was completely off base. If you're getting all the data, if you have a box, again, camera is a data box. It's not a mystical, magical, completely misunderstood thing. It's not a unicorn that we can't figure out how it works and how things are made. It's a box made to capture data. It captures luminance and color data. That's what it does. If you're getting all of the building blocks you need in that device, for the scene you're shooting, you got to understand that changing that data box will do absolutely nothing for you, because it's your skills that are causing the problem, not the equipment, not at least the camera, okay? So if you want to say, well, you know, your lighting setup needed this kind of light, it needed to have this kind of mod, that can make sense, okay? But saying that the reason why your scene that has 10 stops of dynamic range and you're using a 13 stop dynamic range camera, saying that you needed one with 16 in order to get the proper image, no, that's not the answer, okay? And it's the same thing. It's the same thing, in my opinion, with lens choices. And I see this happen a lot where people will, you go, okay, what was used on this movie, right? Like what lens and what camera was used on this movie? And they go, oh, it was this camera with these lenses. And they say, okay, if I want to shoot like that cinematographer, I go buy those things. That's not how it works. Those are just tools to get the look that they eventually have, okay? So what I recommend is changing your mindset from being, how do I buy my way into shooting like a freaking expert? You need to really start thinking about all of the other things that goes into filmmaking, and especially when it comes to cinematography, all of the other things that especially high-end, very well-paid cinematographers have at their disposal that you may never have. And you need to be aware of that. And you need to also think about how you can you don't have to match it exactly. All you need to do is get the same mood, the same feel, the same kind of look. It doesn't have to be the exact same look, because you may never have the stuff you need to do it anyway, okay? But you need to start thinking of all the other things you need to do in order to get the feel that they were able to achieve, or to get this similar kind of look that they were able to achieve, okay? And here are the things that you're probably not thinking about if you think it's the camera or the lenses, okay? Number one, you're probably not thinking of all of the other people that help cinematographers get the look that they go for, okay? If you've ever went to a shoot and let's say you were doing everything, you're like a one-person army, and you have to be the producer, you have to be the director, you have to set up the camera, you have to set up the lighting, you have to move the stuff from the car or the van to the set, you have to light the set, you have to do teardown, you have to interview the person who's getting the interview done. If you're doing everything, imagine how your brain is split up in a bazillion different ways. A cinematographer on a Hollywood set needs to focus on one thing: get the shot. The AC and the AC team, they're setting up the camera and getting everything, put the way it's supposed to. If you're running a cinematographer, if you're the cinematographer on a set and you don't have anybody helping you with the camera, guess what? Your attention is going to be derived elsewhere. So you don't even get to be creative. You're doing all the technical crap. If you don't have a gaffer, if you don't have somebody setting up your lights and getting your lights all set up, and let me just try to illustrate this to you. If you've never done this before, if you have a gaffer, you can just say, I need this kind of look or this kind of lighting on that wall. And the gaffer will be like, okay, I know what you need. And they'll go get it. And they'll go set it up, while you as a cinematographer are worried about, okay, I want to make sure I get this camera movement and all this kind of stuff. So they get all of this help. They have all of these other people helping them. And a lot of times the feedback, especially from technicians who are very good at their jobs, like if you've got a high-end cinematographer in Hollywood, they've got a ton of, like, the best of the best are helping them. You're not going to have that. That 99.9% of people who ever do anything with video production or cinema or film production, 99.9% will not have the kind of support that a Roger Deakins has. They won't have it, because it's a very, very small group of people who get to have that. You might have a group of people who are kind of good at it. Maybe you guys can all develop your skills together, but you have to remember, like, especially in Hollywood where people are making a lot of money, dude, that's decades and decades and decades and decades of experience. You can't expect that if you just do a color grading modification and do some nodes in post and you kind of light a scene okay, that you're going to match what these other people are doing, because you're not thinking about all of the other advantages they have over you. Okay? So that's, I think, where you need to get your head. You need to get your head really thinking about, what is it that they have that's helping them that I don't have? Generally, the camera's not the thing. It's the camera that you have. If you have like the Pocket 4K and you can't get a good looking cinematic image out of it, it's not the camera, dude. It's not the camera, it's your skills. The image that I posted earlier, if you like it or don't like it, if you don't like it, that's on me. That's my fault that it doesn't look good. It has nothing to do with the camera. That would be my fault. It would be my choices made. If you liked it, same thing. That would be you liking my choices made. The way that I graded it, the way that I shot it, the focal length of the lens I used versus what name brand was on it is far more important than whether or not you shot with a Zeiss or a Sigma or a Canon or a Nikon or a Voigtlander or whatever. Far more important. Okay? Imagine if you're a director and your actors are so bad, like your actors are so terrible that you're having to like remind them of what their lines are and like tell them how to be motivated for a scene and what they're supposed to feel. I mean, just think about that. Like, just think about how if you were a director and you had absolutely no help from the rest of the people that were there, how hard that would be for you. And if you're an independent filmmaker, the chances are you're not going to be working with like the best actors. You're not going to be working with, the best gaffers. You're not going to be working with, the best ACs and all that. I mean, filmmaking is collaborative. Okay, there's no heroes. It's all collaborative. There's no better example of that, in my opinion, than looking at the story of how Star Wars was made. The original Star Wars was not just George Lucas being a genius. It was not that. Star Wars was a culmination of a lot of very talented and very committed individuals trying to make something work. When they got that footage into, the editing bay, dude, they didn't have a movie. Okay? They didn't have a movie. And it was the visual effects team. It was the editor. It was the people who were doing all of the practical effects with the ships and all that stuff. Like, George Lucas didn't build all those things, and the technical way that they went about shooting, the way that the ships would fly around and kind of make it look like there was an actual space battle. Like, Lucas had the original vision, yes, but it was all collaborative. It was all collaborative. And the same thing is true with cinematography or really anything else. If you don't have, like, for a collaborative project, if you don't have a team of people that can help you get that piece of art out of what you're seeing in front of the lens, then you're going to have a much, much bigger struggle than teams of people who are like, experts getting paid the millions of dollars. Okay? It's just going to be harder for you. And you need to appreciate that and know that, not only is your skill not going to be as high, it's not there. And you should appreciate that. It means you have room to grow. You get to grow as an artist, right? And that it's a very freeing as an artist when you say, the thing holding me back is I just don't have the skill. I just don't have, and I think that a lot of us can actually really feel better about ourselves with it. If you say, maybe I don't have all of the technical skill that it takes to do like a perfect panning shot, but I've got that vision. I just need to find someone to help me do the technical movement of the camera, right? Like, I just want to make sure you understand what I'm saying, okay? There's a difference between having it in your head, right? You have like, I want to get this shot to look this way with this perfect movement. Say it's on a slider or it's on a jib or whatever. Having the technical ability to do that move versus having the vision in your head, those can be two different areas of expertise. Sometimes the technician will have no idea what they're like. They'll have no idea how something should be shot. They'll just know, okay, if I have to do a panning shot with this particular gizmo, I need to do it like this, and I'll get it perfect every time. Okay, that's the technical side and the technical expertise and how important it is, versus someone who's got that creative vision. And some people have that creative vision, and they're like very talented individuals. They just don't have the technical part down. And usually it just takes, learning lighting ratios. It takes learning when to use certain movement, and especially knowing your limitations. If you don't know your limitations are that, you just don't have a big enough place to shoot something, because you can't use, like, if you want to use that 28 millimeter field of view, for example, and you can't back up the camera enough because you don't have a set, I mean, that kind of F's with the whole thing, right? So I hope I'm not going too long on this. But what I'm trying to tell you guys is that, get away from the idea that buying a camera is going to make your shoots any better, like as far as the image quality. Like, get away from that. Okay, focus on the things that generally matter significantly more. It's crew, which usually is tied with budget, but having good crew with you is the most important thing as far as like the technicals of getting the shots. Actors, if you don't have good actors, dude, and you have people in the shots, dude, it's gonna suck. Doesn't matter how you shoot, it's gonna suck. Okay. And here's another thing. For people who are really like sticklers on skin, okay, I hope you guys know this, but there is not a single movie that has been made that's a Hollywood high budget film that doesn't have a dedicated makeup crew to make sure that the skin looks great. Not a single one. And you have people who spend their entire lives living and breathing makeup and makeup effects. And you've got them working on those big budget Hollywood features. That's why it usually looks so good. You got a lot of people working together. Okay? Here's a couple other things. Costume choices and set design. If you're not able to get that cinematic look, often, if you just change the location to something that's more interesting, it's going to pretty much immediately make it look more cinematic. You could have the smallest sensor in the world, but if your lighting for a horror movie is dark and you're in this dingy, scary looking place, it will look awesome because the set will look good. And you need a good set designer or at least a good location scout to find those places and to make sure that you're shooting in an environment that already is telling the story. Okay? Blowing out the background doesn't help. If all you're doing is sitting in a boring ass room like the thing behind me and you're trying to shoot a thriller, it's gonna suck because this is boring. Okay? This is boring as hell. But a good set goes a long way. And sometimes you can get those for free. You just have to drive to wherever it is. Sometimes it's like, we shot a horror and we shot it it wasn't a basement, it was like that underside of a split level. And that gave us the look that we wanted to go for. We didn't even have to really decorate it that much to get what we wanted, which was like a lived-in basement where a guy was living. He was like a gravedigger living in a basement. So, those are the kinds of things that you ought to be looking at more. Costuming also makes a huge difference. If you just got somebody walking around in a white t-shirt, it doesn't tell you anything about them as a character, really. I guess maybe if they were wearing a white t-shirt and they got like spaghetti spilled all over them, then that would be like a funny thing. But generally, like, especially when you see student films, you see the kind of things that I'm talking about, like white walls with nothing decorating it, or like a white t-shirt as costume, or like the hair is a mess, like mine. Unless it really is supposed to be like the character, then, usually that doesn't work. So, those are all other areas that you can focus on and at least acknowledge that those are ways that you can fix it rather than buying a 25, 30, or $50,000 camera. As far as like getting these higher end cameras, a lot of times what especially YouTubers don't understand is that the image quality is not the only thing that matters when you're buying equipment, especially like a camera. When you're buying a camera, what's also important is all the other technical crap that goes along with it. Having like SDI inputs and outputs versus having HDMI, that's a huge thing for people on a set. There are people who want it to lock in place. They don't want an HDMI that you can just yank out, and then you have to get like extra things to try to like clip it in. So sometimes that can be the only thing. They go, well, I'd like to use this particular camera, but there's no SDI. There's one complaint that I thought was really important about the Pocket 4K and why it's not really great for professional use is because there's one mounting point. They said, well, the fact that the Pocket 4K, you have it lightweight, but it only has one mounting point, that means it's not really very secure. That's one of the big complaints I have about the camera. I would like 2 mounting points on it so that I don't need a cage. But I've got to use a cage on it and get like one that has 2 mounting points so that it doesn't wiggle on my tripod. That's really important. It's not the image quality. It's that if I'm using the camera and I'm moving it around, I don't want it to wiggle. I don't want it to not be in the correct spot. I want it to stay ironclad where it's supposed to be. Doesn't matter if I'm like, making an adjustment on the lens or whatever. Like, think about if you're, changing the focus and the camera's wiggling back and forth. That's not a good thing to have on a set. Why people buy cinema lenses is not for the reasons that some people think, especially on YouTube. A cinema housing makes sense for cinema because it is built for getting repeatable results every time. You have measurements on there, so you can like, I don't have my measuring tape over here, but like, especially in the film days, what we did, because the viewfinder would not be great, especially if you're shooting like 16 millimeter or smaller like cameras, what you would do is you'd use tape and measure, if it's like, say the subject was 2 meters away from the camera, you measure that. And the lens is set where if you set it to 2 meters, it's in focus. There's no drift. It's made to go exactly where it says it's supposed to go. Photography lenses, even though you can kind of do mods to you can use like electronic focusing mechanisms that give you hard stops. But the reason why hard stops are better than soft stops in cinema is simply so you know exactly where it's supposed to end and where it's supposed to start. If you want to get the closest focus, you get, boom, stopped. And it makes it where even if you accidentally go a little bit over, it doesn't mean all the markings that you put on for your marks for the talent and to get the perfect focus, it means that with the cinema lens, you're going to nail all of those every time and you can't screw it up. If you like imagine you're using a lens with soft stops or no stops at all on the extreme ends of the focal range, and you go past, that means that all your marks are now irrelevant. They won't work right. You'll have to like fix it. So those are reasons why you would do that and why you would have like a cinema housing. So when people are doing like a comparison, they go, oh, look, the image quality between this cinema lens and this photography lens, they're the same. So, you can save yourself $3,000. Not really, because you're not, if you're looking for a cinema lens and you need to have the housing for it, using a photography lens is not really a proper alternative. It's just not. It's not in the cards because they serve different purposes. And it's not the image quality, it's the function of the way that the thing works entirely. There's like the ARRI cameras with the way that they can transmit wireless stuff. Like that's another reason somebody might want to pick an ARRI over a Blackmagic camera. If the Blackmagic camera doesn't offer that, but the ARRI does, that might be the difference. It might be the image quality. They said, there's no real difference. When I was watching Steve Yedlin's video when he was talking about preparing for, viewing for different footages, he was using anything from a red to whatever, ARRI, red, film, whatever. They all looked pretty much identical as far as the look from each camera. Even though, people on YouTube or, armchair cinematographers will tell you that there's this huge difference between color science and all that, he's able to get the same look. So it's not image quality, it might be a number of other things. Sometimes it's like for a Netflix original, there's like a set list of things that they have to do so that like you can't use an RE Mini because it doesn't shoot native 4K. Even though the RE Mini gives incredible results, it's unfortunate that Netflix has said, oh, well, we can't have that for our 4K content, so it doesn't count if it's for a Netflix original. Ridiculous. And then you end up having to use a camera you don't really want anyway. You might actually think that the image quality is worse on some, like a Red camera or a Canon camera or whatever, but you have to use it anyway. So, those are all things that you need to keep in mind. Just because, some cinematographer you like had to use, some camera for a production that you liked, doesn't mean that in order to get a similar look, you have to buy it. It's not how it works, especially if you're shooting RAW. If you're shooting RAW and you can get all the data captured, the only problem with you not getting the results you want is your own skills. It's, lack of crew. It's, a lack of post-production, grading ability. That's another thing I wanted to point out too. Not all cinematographers are color grading all their own stuff. They may come up with a look they want, but they'll have a lot of other people that will be helping doing like the color correction and stuff like that. The people who are doing color correction and color grading, like the professionals who do that every day, and they've been doing it for a long time. People have been doing it for like a really long time. They have everything down, and they can do it way faster than you can, and they can do it like with more accuracy than you can. Not just because they have better monitors and all that, they just have more experience. So just keep all that stuff in mind, and don't feel bad about yourself. Like if you can't get the same look as a freaking artistic genius, dude, your standards are way up there. Like, don't feel bad about that, okay? Don't feel bad about that. You don't, and it might be that you have a look that you can achieve that is just as good or just as artistic, but you're so focused on trying to copy someone else that you haven't developed your own auteur or your own look. So just try to think about those things, and yeah. That's why when Roger Deakins wins any prize, always think his team he knows is not working alone. Never. Yeah, that's right. People who I think have a lot of integrity acknowledge that and know that it takes a team of people to really get projects like, especially really big budget, high-end projects. Like, it takes so many people to get that stuff done. If you look at any film, especially one that has a lot of visual effects, and you sit there, like, actively make sure you sit there and you watch the whole credit sequence, okay? Not only is it fair to the artists that worked on the thing you just saw, but when you watch that credit list, keep in mind that not everybody's credited. There's even more people who have worked on it. Those are just the people who made the cut to be accepted. I've worked on many movies when I was working in visual effects, and I only got credited a couple times. None. I think it was only on Top Gun when we remastered it for 3D. Top Gun actually had it where certain people who were in our outsource facility that was doing a bunch of other like rotoscoping and masking and alpha generation, for that one, a lot of them got credited, but for almost every other film that we worked on, none of those people who have, in my opinion, people are doing rotoscoping, masking, alpha generation, especially on a lot of stuff Hollywood does where they do not do what is needed to get good visual effects, like green screen keying and all that. Those people have very difficult jobs, and they don't even get credited. So it's even more people than you think. Even if you've seen, the credit list for the last Avengers movie, keep in mind that's not everybody who worked on it. Travis Teach Me says, what you're saying settles my mind so much. Working alone can be demoralizing. Yes, it can be. I just have to accept that you need other people because most people can't be an expert at everything. I agree with that. I wouldn't claim that I am an expert at everything. I think that would be very difficult, and that would be a lie if I said it. I think there are some people who are experts at like one thing and then they kind of suck at other things. There are some people who are like cinematographers who are total experts on being able to get a look that's awesome and telling other people and their staff how like what they want to do, like basically painting with the light. But they couldn't tell you like the difference between different brands, different looks of lenses. Like they couldn't tell you what the technical reasons were for picking one thing over another. They just go, just get that. If you ever seen stuff by Annie Leibovitz, especially her earlier work, I wouldn't say that in a lot of senses she really had that great of a technical understanding, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter if like she shot a guy in a weird looking, like I don't remember who it is, but it's just this guy standing against an ugly wall, and it's like an ugly shot, but it's like a beautiful ugliness to it. And it's like you look at it and you go, I don't think she followed any of the rules of lighting or any of the rules of what you're supposed to do, but it looks awesome anyway. And it was weird because I was looking at like some of the Annie Leibovitz stuff where it was like trying to sell me classes by her, and she had like a colorist doing the work, like a colorist was doing the work, and she was just kind of pointing at the screen saying to do things. And I was like, that would kind of make sense if you didn't have the full technical know-how to do all of it. But sometimes it doesn't matter. Like if you're an artist and you're getting paid enough to get other people who are the experts at those technical jobs to help you, you don't have to be perfect. And especially, Travis, teach me, my problem, I'll tell you my weakness is doing any kind of camera movement. I suck at that, dude. Like I can't do like a pan over to save my life. Not without like, I remember when I was working in the news, there's like, with the way that the cameras are set up, it helps you with like the counterbalancing system to get like a decent pan over for stuff. But dude, like doing a good smooth panning shot by yourself can be really difficult, especially if you have shaky hands like I do. It sucks, man. And I would love it if I had like a good camera person who could do that stuff. But if I'm working by myself, I'm stuck with what I got. So you know what I do? I lock the camera down when I can. I just lock the camera down, and I'll do pans where I have to and do like 100 takes until I'm happy with it. But I know my limitations, and it's, if you know yours, you can work around them. And it can be demoralizing, but just don't give up.